Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński and you're watching Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you everything you need to know. Russian oil giant Rosneft has officially announced a catastrophic drop in profits. In 9 months, the company earned 70% less than last year. At the same time, data on cash flow has mysteriously disappeared from the reports, making it a real game of find the money to assess the company's financial condition. While Rosneft used to boast about its profits, right now it's trying to hush up the talk of dwindling revenues by sweeping its spreadsheets under the rug. You're not supposed to know what remains of its once impressive oil sales, which are subject to huge discounts due to sanctions, by the way. In the meantime, the Kremlin hastily adopted rescue tax breaks. The company will receive almost $128 million per year during the period between 2026 and 2030. For a state giant, this is like giving a child a single candy on the way through an African desert. It is nice, but it doesn't really change the overall situation, now does it? Rosneft is not alone in its problems either. Gazprom and Russian Railways have also racked up record debts and topped the rating of Russia's most debt-laden companies. In other words, even in the world of state monopolies, loans are now in vogue, and the profits, instead of going through the roof, have apparently gone out of the window, which, as you may remember, is a very Russian way to go. Today, when you take a closer look, Rosneft resembles a big inflatable duck. It's huge, maybe even slightly majestic in a semi-serious way. But if the wind blows a bit stronger, it will fly away, along with the memory of strong profits. The irony is that the state is saving its oil giants while leaving the rest of its citizens with only pleasant surprises in the form of rising prices or skyrocketing taxes. Rosneft's problems are a clear illustration of how the Russian economy is deteriorating due to the war and sanctions. Large state-owned companies receive tax subsidies, debts are still growing, and profits are falling rapidly. The simple conclusion is that even billions in subsidies cannot replace a healthy market and a stable economy. And then there is the whole thing about waging a pointless and very, very expensive military conflict. Funny how Vladimir Putin, who loves to brag about his knowledge of history, has seemingly forgotten how the Soviet Union went belly up. Should we remind him? No. Actually, Vlad, you're doing great. Want more unsustainable defense spending? Sure, go ahead. An extra load is what every sinking ship needs. You slay your economy. A brand new tourist service has appeared in Russia that literally no tourist has ever asked for. A draft notice right in the airport arrivals area. While some countries welcome guests with champagne or souvenirs, Russia has decided to welcome them with the military registration and enlistment office. And this is taking place literally at the foot of the stairs, as the Viesti Urala, or News from the Urals news site, openly described in its latest report. On the 19th of November, new migration control points were opened at 12 Russian airports. Now, officially, this was to catch foreigners who violate migration laws. Unofficially, however, it turned out that Russian citizens who had simply returned from Turkey, Egypt, or St. Petersburg to Sochi were also caught up in the crackdown.
Что завтра?
Вам необходимо завтра явиться.
Мне завтра обратно билет, обратно улетаем.
8:00.
Едва этот мужчина успел прилететь на Урал, как ему сразу напоминают, улететь обратно просто так не получится. Он может приехать из любой страны, но по документам он гражданин России, а значит обязан встать на воинский учет, даже если завтра обратный рейс, планы придется корректировать.
Почему на учете не стоите?
Я вот как раз буду заниматься на этой неделе.
На этой неделе будете
Да, я вот
заниматься
ездил.
установкой на воинский учет?
Тем, кто еще не оформил документы, вручают повестки. Это шанс исправить нарушение. Игнорирование же обойдется дорого. Штраф до 30 тысяч рублей.
According to human rights activists, those with non-Slavic appearance are checked first. They say that it is physically impossible to check all men. Military registration offices, after all, are chronically understaffed. However, for those who have recently obtained Russian citizenship, the risks are very real. There is no escaping the draft, and ignoring it can lead to problems with your passport. Simply put, if you wanted Russian citizenship, you get military service as a kind of bonus. It's a combo package that, once again, nobody asked for. The Russian authorities are once again demonstrating their preferred approach. Fewer people means fewer problems, especially if those people end up in the army. Airports, which should be gateways to the world, are turning into yet another funnel for mobilization. Now, Russians are likely to travel the world thinking, I'm going away on holiday. What if I don't come back? There are few countries in the world where returning home is more dangerous than flying through a tropical storm, for example. However, Russia is actually one of them. The Russian media is undergoing a veritable transformation. Cities that have been completely destroyed and razed to the ground are being presented as liberated. Yeah, we've seen that before. In the eyes of Kremlin propagandists, black smoke from burning buildings and broken windows are not a tragedy for the civilian population, but a heroic operation to restore order.
Я продолжу мысль о том, что очень трудно вести дипломатические переговоры в ситуации, когда твоя армия наступает, когда начальник генерального штаба докладывает о том, что захвачены важные города и в перспективе...
Освобождены.
Именно. Освобождены очень важные города, регионы, очень стратегически важные пункты, открывают возможности наступления. И в этой ситуации у переговоров несколько задач, которые нужно решать одновременно. Одна из задач состоит в том, чтобы никак не позволить противнику использовать переговоры как передышку для того, чтобы собраться силами и сохранить или усилить, может быть, даже сопротивление. Что мы можем сейчас констатировать, ну, если не нового, то, во всяком случае, важного для этой стадии переговоров? Во-первых, мы это поняли сразу, но теперь весь мир понял, что за Украину ни Соединенные Штаты, ни Европа воевать не будут.
If, in reality, a city under Russian control is destroyed to its foundations, for propaganda purposes, it is all reframed, not as an attack, but a humanitarian mission. It's never occupation, it's temporary administration, and last but not least, it's not destruction, it is reconstruction. The word liberated in news reports is often accompanied by images of destroyed buildings, smoke and empty streets. The logic of propaganda is simple. The more terrible the city looks, the more liberated it is. Liberated from the usual hustle and bustle of city life, from crowds, from traffic, literally everything that kept it alive. What we get instead is more like a knockoff Russian edition of the Fallout series, except ordinary people actually serve as extras with lethal consequences. Also, let's take a quick look at the facts here. In 2014, Russia began its misguided quest for liberation of Ukrainian territories. Back when the Western media still bought the whole separatist movements narrative, remember that? Since then, Crimea has been turned into a military garrison. Persecution of local Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars has become a daily occurrence, and the annexed parts of the Donbass have begun to languish under a corrupt, brutal Russian administration. The war that followed in 2022 is estimated to have already cost enough damage to Ukraine that a hefty $500 billion will have to be spent over the next decade to rebuild the country. And in every area Russia has illegally wrested away from Ukraine, the situation is as dire as you might expect. War crimes, torture, persecution and stagnation. The four horsemen of the Russian apocalypse, though it's more like an entire cavalry regiment, really. Geopolitical false advertising on a mass scale. It says liberation on the label, but it's really just repackaged colonialism and ethnic cleansing. Worst unboxing ever. And with this, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.